We have an emergency exit outside the doors to my right and down to the end of the corridor, and another out the main doors behind you. In the unlikely event of an emergency, a staff member will help you out of the building. The library was established in 1854. We are the second oldest library in Victoria, public library in Victoria. We have a collection of over 70,000 items, and we take pride in being the sole library in Australia with such an extensive collection available for loan. Just to let you know, our library staff, Jade over there, will be capturing photographs and videos during today's event for promotional purposes. If you prefer not to be included, please let us know. Now I would like to introduce our speaker today, Heather Arnold. Heather is the president of the Kuwirup Swamp Historical Society, secretary of the Southeastern Historical Association and the Mechanics Institutes of Victoria, and was for many years the local history librarian at Casey Cardinia Libraries. She is a local history enthusiast, lives and breathes history, and firmly believes that everyone and everything has a story worth telling. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. So, thank you, Lauren, for that introduction. I am indeed a local history enthusiast, and that's all I ever do in my life. I write history, I research history, and I talk about history. So today I am going to do a eclectic look at the social history of mechanics institutes. And when I say eclectic, it's sort of just random. Anything I thought I wanted to write about or talk about is what I'm talking about today. So I'm going to sit down for this because my knees won't stand this whole presentation. So before I start, so this is the Kuwirup Swamp, the Kuwirup Hall, and this was built in 1903 and became a Mechanics Institute about 1911, 1912, and then later a memorial hall. So I actually was born at Kuwirup, and this is why, and you'll find Kuwirup and Kuwirup Swamp features quite a bit in this talk. So that's our Kuwirup Hall, well, was our Kuwirup Hall, demolished in 2002. And that's right. Just to tell you, the images in this presentation come from the Merck collection, including the Western collection of the Mechanics Institutes of Victoria, the State Library of Victoria, Museums Victoria, Trove, Kuwirup Sun and the Kuwirup Swamp Historical Society. And I'd also like to acknowledge a lot of information comes from Pam Barry-Bonner's book and written with Ken James. This book here, The History of Mechanics Institutes. So we'll just do a quick history of Mechanics Institutes. And the Mechanics Institutes movement began in 1800 when Dr. George Birkbeck of the Andersonian Institute in Scotland gave a series of lectures to local mechanics or artisans, workmen, and the lectures were free and proved popular. So, and this led to the formation of the Edinburgh School of Arts in 1821 and later the London Mechanics Institute in 1823. And the Mechanics Institute movement then spread throughout the world, especially the British Empire, and the first Mechanics Institute here in Australia, or what was become Australia, was the Van Diemen's Land Mechanics Institute, which was established at a meeting held March the 23rd, 1827. Nearly 200 years ago, and we have a small committee that I'm on and Gary's on from the MIB to plan celebrations for the 200th anniversary of Mechanics Institutes in Victoria. In Melbourne, of course. Here. The Melbourne Mechanics Institute was established in 1839 and renamed the Melbourne Athenaeum in the year 1873. And the Athenaeum, of course, continues to provide library services to the people of Victoria on the same location in their building in Collins Street. So that's what it looked like. It had a new facade put on in 1886. But essentially it looks like that today. So it's the Athenaeum, the oldest library in Victoria. And as you have just heard, the Param Mechanics Institute is the second oldest library in Victoria. However, before I heard that, I wondered to myself, what actually is the second oldest library? And I thought we'd turn to this article here that was in the Argus, March 29, 1956, where the secretary of the Kyneton Mechanics Institute, Mrs. Florence Brown, she claims that the Kyneton Mechanics Institute is the oldest one of its type in Victoria. So that was her claim, because she said it was on the original Crown land, and it's carried on as it started, she says, and for this reason we claim to be the oldest institute in Victoria. So as much as I like Mrs. Brown, clearly she's wrong in that sense, because clearly she's not the oldest institute in Victoria, because there's the Athenaeum and there's the Param Mechanics Institute. But I suspect that Mrs. Brown probably never considered the Athenaeum Library to be a mechanics institute in the sense of her small, where is it? Hang on, sorry, this one. In the sense that her small country mechanics institute was. So she claims to be the oldest one in Victoria, and I'm happy to go with Mrs. Brown on that. So she can be the oldest country one, and the Athenaeum of Param can be the oldest city one. So it's actually, this article was about 70 years before this, in 1956 minus 70, 1880s, there was people from the Mechanics Institute were arrested for holding a raffle. And then it went to court, and they lost. And then the policeman appealed to the Supreme Court, and he lost there as well. So the good people of Kyneton were not charged with holding an illegal raffle. So anyway, oh, here, where am I to? Right, so clearly what I'm saying here. So I think what we found out from Mrs. Brown and her connection to the Kyneton Mechanics Institute was that there was actually this real connection between people who volunteered at the Mechanics Institute and their own building. And there's an article entitled Mechanics Institutes and Their Place in the Community in the Ferntree Gully News in 1927, and that sort of articulated similar connections. So the writer talks about the development of mechanics institutes in England, and then goes on with, in the Antipodes, they have moulded to what appears to be local wants and wishes, standing frequently on land presented by or still Crown property. It must be seen that residents of such districts have a claim to a share in the institution, which must be of the greatest benefit where the personal feeling, this is our club, this is our hall, prevails. And it was this sense of community that led many towns to develop their own mechanics institute. So this is Coralline. This is actually where I grew up, at Coralline. Not actually in the hall, of course, but this is where I grew up, at Coralline. And in Coralline, in 1910, the Progress Association moved a motion to establish a mechanics hall and free library. And at the same meeting, they moved the motion to have a ball in the hall to raise money for the piano. Before then, at the next meeting, they moved another motion saying, we won't buy the piano until the hall is actually built. So clearly they thought that perhaps, it sort of indicates to me that perhaps they were looking at their Mechanics Institute as a place for entertainment rather than education. So not only did the good people of Coralline, they formed the committee, they fundraised, but then the 18 men actually acted as guarantors for the hall. So anyone, halls often had to take a loan at. So there was 18 people at Coralline, which was a small town, who were prepared to act as guarantors for the hall. And of course, I'm using Coralline as an example, but this was the sort of typical as a development of mechanics institutes in country towns all throughout Victoria. And they spent, endless time fundraising to erect the building, excuse me, maintain the building, purchase books, and later to improve the building. And these are just some examples of fundraising, community fundraisers for various mechanics institutes, including Glen Waverley. I didn't know they had a mechanics institute, and the one at Dalston. But this was happening all throughout Victoria, local community fundraising. Now, as we know, often Crown land was set aside for mechanics institutes, and we've all seen these ads in the Victorian or notices in the Victorian Government Gazette. This is for the establishment of a mechanics institute of what is Iona. They call it Kura East. But in some cases, the land was donated. So this is the Narre Warren Mechanics Institute, and the land was donated for that building by Sydney Webb. So Sydney Webb clearly thought that his business interests coincided with his community interests, because in he lived at, this is him here, he lived at Holly Green at Narre Warren. So this is now the site of the Fountain Gate Shopping Centre, if you know that. And he lived at Holly Green, and he in 1882 he agitated for a railway station at Narre Warren. He then collected money to raise money to create a road from the railway station to his new shops, named Webb Street. And then he built the shops, and then he thought, oh, we need a school and a hall, so he donated money for the school and the hall. So, you know, he had this sense of community, but clearly it was connected to his idea that we need to develop Narre Warren into a thriving town, and I guess he owned all the land, and, you know, he went on with that. So there's cases like that. This is the hall. Hang on, we'll go back to here. And the Narre Warren, as it was called then, Narre Warren Railway Township Mechanics Institute was actually opened on 9th of November, the Prince of Wales's birthday in 1891. But that was only open on land that was, as I said, donated by Sydney Webb. And closer to home here, the original Crown Mechanics Institute was built on land in 1854 in Chapel Street, on land donated by James Mason, who owned the hotel, the Royal George Hotel, this building here next door. You'd have to wonder whether he thought that a Mechanics Institute next to his hotel might have helped business as well. He was also on the Paran Council from 1856 to 1960, and later the St Kilda Council. This is James Mason here. The James Mason room is down below us. One of the rooms here is named after James Mason. And he lived at Alfriston in Brighton Road in, well, it was actually Elwood, they called it St Kilda then. And he lived there from 1877 till 1977. So James Mason was another man who donated land for Mechanics Institute with, I'm sure, the best interests of the community at heart, but clearly did not hurt his business interest either. So it's no wonder that with all the fundraising that many communities undertook to erect and maintain their Mechanics Institute, that people in the community had a real connection to their building. So now we'll look at parts of the Mechanics Institute, the library. So the library was, of course, an integral part of the Mechanics Institute, but there was debate, it seems, from the start as to whether they were well used and what sort of books they should stock. So this is a report from the Gisborne Gazette in February 1914, and it says, when Mechanics Institutes were first established in Scotland in 1800, they were, as the title indicates, associations of mechanics, men who worked hard but who were bent on self-improvement. For this purpose, the centre of each institute was a reading room and a lending library, and with these, the lecture hall and classes. In Australia, we have copied the name, but in country districts, at all events, there is little else resembling the original Mechanics Institutes of Great Britain. It is true there is a hall and a library, but instead of lectures, the hall is generally used for dancing and classes have given way to billiards and cards. Our Riddles Creek correspondent points out that the local institute is prospering, and it is satisfying to learn such is the case. The library, however, is a dead failure. And the books lie as so much lumber, for no one can be found at Riddles Creek to read them. There is, we understand, a similar state of affairs as Sunbury and New Gisborne. In both townships, there are excellent libraries, but the books are packed away, for no one wants to read them. The floor of the hall must be kept in good order for dancing, but the books are not wanted. So, that was it. Also in 1914, There was also arguments about what type of books that there should be in mechanics institutes. So in 1914, the Mount Alexander Mail had this story regarding the reading of fiction. What the reading public seems to want nowadays is fiction, all fiction. Much of this is absolutely rubbish, but it apparently pleases people. In Castlemaine, the literary taste does not differ greatly from that of many other places. What books did the local people like, was the question asked at the Mechanics Institute yesterday afternoon. Fiction, replied the secretary. Fiction is most popular. Works of educative value are seldom asked for, and the public does not seem to take to them. They want fiction and as much as they can get. So nothing wrong, of course, with reading fiction, but clearly some people thought there was. So you can occasionally in newspapers you see lists of titles of new titles at various Mechanics Institute. This is a list of new titles in 1882 that the Berwick Mechanics Institute had just acquired, and in this list here is at Horsham, all fiction. And it's interesting that bit at the bottom. A case containing over 50 volumes of miscellaneous matter has been received on loan from the Melbourne Public Library, and these works are now ready for issue. Because, of course, the Melbourne Public Library, which is the state library, now the state library, they used to distribute books to these various country mechanics institutes. And if you want to know what sort of books were in country libraries, this is the Narrowtown Mechanics Institute, and the actual building and the collection is now at the old Gippstown Museum, well, Gippstown Folk Village at Moe. And the box on the left is the Melbourne Public Library travelling box, which transported books from the library in the city by trains to country towns. The box is the only one of its kind known to exist, which is sort of interesting. So you can see this at Moe, at the Folk Museum there. And that's just more examples of their original collection. You can also see at the Berwick Mechanics Institute, they still have a collection of their 19th century books on display there as well, which you can have a look at. And this is just a Ballarat Mechanics Institute library, clearly a much grander sort of scale than there would have been at the small country libraries. So, anyway, in the end, I'm not sure whether the good people of Sunbury, Riddles Creek and New Gisborne did actually not read. Perhaps they read when they had the opportunity, or perhaps they were just too busy to read running their farms. But anyway, that's interesting. The other intrinsic part of Mechanics Institutes was the lecture hall. So we're just going to look at a few of the types of lectures. This is a photo of the Berwick Mechanics Institute in the 1970s. It's since been extended both sides, with an extension both sides. Hard to believe. You can it's teeny tiny. Before. Mr. Cam, who is president of the Mechanics Institute, gave a lecture on the mechanism of the universe. And Mr. Cam said that he was not only going to confine the audience's attention to the solar system, but to travel with them into the depths of space. And in 1901, there was a lecture here at Berwick Mechanics Institute on the industrial progress of Great Britain in the 19th century by Mr. Poole. This here is the Pakenham Mechanics Institute, the only photo that I can find of it. And they had various lectures as well. And as you might expect in a rural country town, they had lectures on dairying, on growing potatoes. And also in 1914, the editor of The Age, Mr. Sweetland, gave a lecture on how a great newspaper is produced. So, yeah. However, it wasn't just earthly matters which were discussed in Mechanics Institutes. Lectures or activities related to spiritualism were also held. Spiritualism is a is a belief that the spirit of a deceased person still exists and may be communicated with by a medium. And this movement came to prominence in the 1870s. And some of the high-profile supporters included Alfred Deakin, who was our second Prime Minister. Alfred Deakin actually met his wife at a spiritualist meeting. He was a Sunday school teacher there, and she was his Sunday school pupil. And her father, I can't remember her name, her father was also involved in the spiritualist movement. E.W. Cole, Cole's Book Arcade, and the publisher of Cole's Funny Picture Book, was a spiritualist, as well as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who created the Sherlock Holmes books. So there was a lot of really high-profile people involved in spiritualism at those times. So this is a Stanford Mechanics Institute down near Coleraine. In March 1878, the medium, Mrs. Annie Rayner, she visited the town and held a séance. And the Hamilton Spectator had this report. Last week, we had a visit from Mrs. Rayner, a lady medium, who has been causing quite an excitement in the neighbourhood of Stanford by her mediumistic powers. She was invited to give a séance to a select few, but the crowd, to be enlightened by the spirits, was so great that the private room at the hotel could not hold a quarter of those who were desirous of being present. And an adjournment was made to the Mechanics Institute, where nearly 100 persons soon congregated. A chairman having been appointed, Mrs. Raymond was introduced, Rayner, and was introduced. The lady medium then took her seat at the table, and at her request, Mr. Keeley played Home Sweet Home softly, during which time Mrs. Rayner closed her eyes, and with the assistance of a small magnet, a few spasmodic twitches of the face, and the slow music, she went off into a beautiful trance. The music being stopped, the spirit of some departed brother began to hold forth on spiritualism. I don't know whether many of the listeners found it edifying, but a great many undoubtedly found it tedious, for they left the hall. The thread of the lecture was delightfully disconnected, and when the medium had finished, she left the audience about as much enlightened on spiritualism as before she commenced. That's Mrs. Rayner at Stanford. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, he came out to a tour of Australia in the 1920s, about 1920, and he gave lectures on spiritualism all throughout Australia, including here at the Geelong Mechanics Institute. So, and before he left, he was given this illuminated address by the spiritualists of Melbourne and Victoria. So he was given this one from Melbourne and also one from New South Wales, and they were in this lovely little presentation box, which is at the State Library of South Australia. So, you know, it's sort of an interesting part of our history. Right. Now, one of the most significant contributions of Mechanics Institutes to Victorian history, in my opinion, was the fact that the women's suffrage movement began in a Mechanics Institute. I've actually glossed over this a bit. Didn't actually. The second meeting was at a Mechanics Institute. Anyway, women in South Australia had gained the right to vote and stand for Parliament in 1894, and in 1902, women Australia-wide were granted the right to vote and stand for Parliament, and the first election they could vote in was 1903. Victoria was the last state to give women the right to vote, and this was in 1908, and they couldn't actually stand for election until 1923. Anyway. So in May 1884, a small group of people, because they're some of the originators of the movement for the enfranchising of women, a small group of people met in South Yarra, and then the next time they met was October that year, 1884, and they met here at the South Melbourne Mechanics Institute, part of the town hall, and they moved the motion that, in the opinion of this meeting, it is desirable that the Victorian legislators should pass an act legalising women's suffrage. So that was like the first motion about trying to gain women's suffrage held in the Mechanics Institute. And after that, there were many debates and lectures in Mechanics Institutes all throughout Victoria on the very subject of women's suffrage. So, for instance, there was a meeting held at the Newry Mechanics Institute in 1894. That's Newry here, up near Maffra, and one held at the Murniong Hall, a debate at Murniong in 1895. There was also a debate in 1897 at the Narre Warren Mechanics Institute, where the Narre Warren Literary and Debating Society was formed at the Institute, and they talked about women's suffrage was their first debate. There were also a lot of high-profile people who were involved in the suffrage movement. So this is Vida Goldstein. So the electorate of Goldstein, which is just somewhere around here, is named after Vida. She was someone who fought for women's suffrage, and she was also the first woman to stand for Parliament in 1903. So she spoke in 1900 at both the Cheltenham and the Kyneton Mechanics Institutes. And it was reported that at Kyneton, she gave cogent reasons why women should be enfranchised. She also answered satisfactorily questions from the anti-suffragists. So interestingly enough, this is her father here, Lieutenant Colonel Jacob Goldstein, who was a member of the Women's Anti-Suffrage League. So no wonder she could answer questions about it, because she obviously argued with her father about it. So Jacob Goldstein delivered many lectures as well on the other side of the question. And then, for instance, in 1900, he was at the Buller Mechanics Institute. So it'd be interesting to know, her mother was also a social reformer, Isabella, his wife, their mother, and she was also a suffragist. And the mother, Isabella, and Jacob had actually separated but still lived in the same house. So you can just imagine conversations over breakfast, I don't know. So those two people both travelled around to many country mechanics institutes and lectured on the issue of suffrage. And while we're on the subject of women, so halls were an interesting, sort of equal opportunity space where women could hold meetings. So, for instance, the Keurup Country Women's Association was established in 1929 and met at the local hall. The Gartwell Country Women's Association, established in 1931, met at the local hall. And of interest, of course, the fact is that local halls had toilets available well before, decades before, comfort stations were established in many towns. So for women to have a space to meet with all those sort of conveniences and a kitchen was quite a notable thing. And of course, men could have met in hotels, but women weren't sort of encouraged to go to hotels in those days. For many local communities, the first meetings to establish baby healthcare centres were also held at mechanics institutes. And in Keurup, for instance, I'll talk about Keurup quite a bit, the Infant Welfare Centre was opened at the hall in 1946, and it wasn't until 1953 that a dedicated centre was opened. But in many country towns, or even like the outer suburbs, these sort of baby healthcare centres would have met first in the Mechanics Institute halls. And women, of course, always could act as a librarian, perhaps sometimes. So there was a number of female librarians, including Miss Grant, Miss Searle, Miss Teller, and Miss Holt. None of them have names. Until 1913, when Mrs. Harriet Bain, she was the librarian there for 17 years. Then Miss Chappell for 21 years, and later Mrs. Pam Darling, who some of you may know, she was the librarian there from 1962 to 2009. And I think that Berwick Mechanics Institute is an interesting case. It's still there. It still lends out books. It's still a thriving little library with and quite a contrast to the Narre Warren Library, the local public library run by Casey, which is like a really high-tech sort of space. So they offer, it's interesting that the Berwick Mechanics Institute has survived, and it's only through people like Mrs. Darling, I think, who's kept it alive. So I think librarians like her, who had an honorarium but weren't really paid, should get more credit than what they do to keep these small mechanics institutes running, especially with the force. I mean, I'm a librarian. I trained as a librarian. Like in the 70s, in the 80s, I would have thought, well, you get rid of Berwick Mechanics Institute, but now I man the barricades to save it. I just think there's such an important thing. But when I was young, I thought, well, who'd want to go there? But they offer such a great, Berwick especially offers such a great alternative to the sort of high-tech, soulless, in my opinion, Bunjil Place Library. Anyway, that's beside the point. And of course, as you would know, endless functions were held at Mechanics Institutes. This is balls, concerts, political meetings, church services, wedding receptions. This is at Gormandale here, a wedding reception. In fact, my own sister, when she married in 1980, she had her wedding reception at the Pakenham Hall. So, yeah. And of course, during the war, especially the First World War, but also the Second World War, endless concerts, patriotic concerts, fundraisers were held in the Mechanics Institute to raise money for the Red Cross, the Belgium Nurses Relief Fund, the comfort funds, as they call them, oodles of these events. And they also held the send-offs when the soldiers left to go overseas, and the welcome homes. And this is, once again, to cheer up our 3 soldiers who were welcomed home. With 300 people attended this event at the Current Mechanics Institute in 1918. There's Cochrane, Bill Gilchrist and Billy McGree. There's Cochrane ended up as on the Cranbourne Shire for 34 years, and at the same time was also a member of the Legislative Assembly, and he was in Sir Henry Bolton's cabinet as well. So, I think that's really nice. So, but it wasn't just the living that could occupy Mechanics Institute. I found some various reports of inquests held at Mechanics Institutes, including one where the body was there as well. So it was a place for the living and the dead. Sorry, not funny because it's a sad case. Anyway, the report goes, the funeral of Mrs. Houseman, the wife of a Presbyterian minister at Barnadown, which is near Bendigo, was stopped by a telegram from Superintendent Ryle just as the mournful cortege was approaching the Goonang Cemetery. The body was then conveyed to the Goonang Hall, where an inquest was held by Mr. Patterson, presiding magistrate. After reviewing a quantity of evidence, the jury returned a verdict as follows: that the deceased Blanche Houseman died on the 21st of October at Barnadown from bronchitis complicated by childbirth. And we are of the opinion that if the medical man had been called in sooner, her life might have been saved. And her husband, J.G. Houseman, and Sophia Heatley, a niece, were guilty of negligence in not calling the doctor sooner. But we do not intend this verdict to be one of manslaughter against either of them. So it's interesting at that time that the inquest was held at the hall. You see oodles of accounts in the past of inquests being held at hotels, and that was quite but quite a regular thing, especially the early 1800s. So, but this is the first one I've found an inquest for the body actually being found at a hall. Oh, that's the inquest, sorry. Yeah. Movies. So, of course, one of the more prominent uses of Mechanics Institute was showing films. And this book here, as we looked at before, has a list by Royce Harris, who's a cinema historian, and he lists 180 Mechanics Institutes, which actually show pictures of films. Does not list Cure Up, so it's 181. Anyway, so they were all throughout Victoria, Mechanics Institutes were used to show movies from the 1910s onwards. In 1925, December 1925, the Argus could report on the following interesting statistics regarding cinemas in Victoria. Including the new theatres, there are now 87 picture theatres in the suburbs. In the country, the number is 242, of which 45 are modern construction. In addition, there are 170 touring shows, this including public halls and small places where pictures are exhibited only occasionally. There is scarcely a village without some sort of picture entertainment, and the number is constantly being added to. And it was Mechanics Institutes that many of these pictures were shown in country towns. It also has a statistic that they predict in 1925 that on a Saturday afternoon in Melbourne, 150,000 people would have attended the cinema, which is an extraordinary number. So, of course, as we know, many Mechanics Institutes were used. In 1922 was when Andrew Colvin started showing pictures at the Cura Mechanics Institute. And even after the Wattle Theatre was built in Cura in July 1927, like every Saturday night, there'd be Andrew Colvin showing pictures at the Mechanics Institute and pictures being shown at the Wattle Theatre. Even in the town like Cura, they could sort of they could, accommodate two lots of picture theatres. So much was the interest in
What's that? The
Yeah.
pictures? Is that how long the film thing is?
What is it?
4,000.
Is that 2,000?
Oh, I guess it is. Oh, yeah, look at that. Oh.
2,000 feet is 20 minutes.
Oh, right.
2,000 feet is what, sir?
Is 20 minutes.
Well, there you go.
There you go. Well, oh, sparkling coffee. What is it? Anyway, that's it. Cura. And there was also a picture theatre at Pakenham and Coralline and all these other places, not Pakenham, Garfield. So lots of competition for the picture entertainment. And just a few other odd examples of movies being shown at Mechanics. This is at Minya and at Tatura and at Caramburra, 1918. And at Bacchus Marsh, they could have the Mechanics pictures on a Saturday night and the Chrysanthemum Society Grand Pictures on a Tuesday night. Oh, and of course, you can still find some of the bio boxes in existence. This is a Tynong Hall. That's it there. You can't actually access it anymore. And this is a picture of the old Lock Mechanics Institute. And they had a bio box there. Very glamorous hall, obviously. Yeah.
Bio box being short for
Oh, good question.
projection.
Projector. Oh, you made a projector on here. Yeah.
Why is it?
Sorry, I should have. Why is it called a bio box? Good question.
Short for biograph.
Biograph, thank you.
They had two.
Okay.
And all those have been added long after the hall was still.
Yeah, well, we think in China was sort of maybe the 1940s, but that it was added. Even the hall was built about 1900. It's the China Hall. I've written it. China actually means many fish, I think, but I did a little history of the China Hall, and there's about 5 halls that were there. One was there, and it started there, so I decided China means many halls, but anyway, that was anyway, that's the bio boxes. So, with this broad range of activities that Mechanics Institutes for both the young and the old, the issue of comfort of the patrons arose in the issue of smoking. So well before it became banned in workplaces, in the 1980s, even when I worked in public libraries, they still allowed us smoke in the libraries. So well before that was banned in there was the issue of smoking that arose in Mechanics Institutes. In Ballarat, this is a Ballarat Mechanics Institute, still in existence. In 1878, a letter to the local paper. Sir, I do not think that the decision arrived at by the committee of the Mechanics Institute will give any satisfaction to those who sign the requisition for a room for the use of non-smoking members to play chess and draft sim. The room now to be set apart for that purpose is situated in the most objectionable part of the whole building, as all persons using it must go through the smoking room to get at it. And each time the door is opened, the objectionable smoke of the other room will be carried into it until the atmosphere will assimilate to that of the smoking room itself. And then in Indigo, Sandhurst one. This was in another letter to the paper, 1887. A question affecting the interests of the Sandhurst Mechanics Institute is likely to give rise to lively discussion at the annual meeting of members. It is whether smoking is to be allowed in the chess room or not. Up to very recently, members have been content with the pure, sweet atmosphere of heaven, the natural breath of life pervading the building. But since the opening of the fine new chess room, smokers have suddenly desired to raise a cloudier atmosphere in which they alone can revel. And as a way to actually encourage patronage, they're saying there should be more smoking. So this is at the Melbourne Athenaeum in 1891. A smoking room was tried a few months ago, but its gloom and discomfort was enough to discourage the most persistent indulger in tobacco, and so it has been abandoned. Still, with better accommodation, it is certain that a large number of now subscribers would be induced to join the institution if they were allowed to smoke as well as read. Now, a topic close to my heart, disasters. I don't know how many reports you see of mechanics institutes burning down. So we'll start with floods. As I grew up on the Coorab Swamp, and we're used to floods there. They're part of our life. I talked before about the Caroline Mechanics Institute. It was named Keith Hall after the local politician. And it was flooded before it was even open, so lucky they didn't have the piano. It was supposed to be open in June 1911, but the local paper reported the Keith Hall, a new building at Caroline, which was said to be officially open last night, has about 3 feet of water in it. And then it was finally opened in August. Was not the last time it was flooded. September 1916, Caroline. Houses, the State School and the hall are full of water. October 1923, the water was 6 feet deep in the hall. And then, of course, our best flood was December 1934, which actually affected all of Victoria, but we like to consider it just affected us. So that's a Caroline Hall here, that's a war memorial, that is water everywhere, that's a recreation reserve behind it. So that was our worst flood. In fact, the 1934 flood, I'll just tell you a little family story. My family, we grew up at Caroline, my dad grew up at Caroline, and their family spent they had 3.5 feet of water through the house, and the family spent 3 nights in the roof of the house at Caroline. My dad, who was 1, and his 3 older siblings. So, you know, it was just a lot of water. Yeah. And then, of course, our second most flood of the swamp was October 1937. So this is our Caroline Hall again, underwater, and another photo of it. This is good, some paper. The hall there. That's a war memorial, water everywhere, underwater. And then this one here, underwater. Yeah. However, everything was bad living in Caroline. You could have been living 4 miles down the drain at Coorab North, where in September 1918, the local paper reported that during the 2 years of the present teacher's regime, he has suffered no less than 23 floodings. A record that must surely reach the limit of exasperation. So, and this is the Coorab Mechanics Institute. So that is the original Mechanics Institute Hall there, the weatherboard. And about 1923-24, this brick part was built on the front for the RSL, and it became a memorial hall. So water was actually 3 feet, up to 6 feet deep in the town of Coorab. So that's our disaster at Coorab. Floods, one type of disaster. Another type of disaster was an explosion. Oh. So the use, yes, I know, you'd be surprised. The use of generators in mechanics institutes to power lighting and film projectors presented a danger as the acetylene gas used as fuel was extremely flammable. And here are 2 examples. So Werribee in 1908. Mr. Peacock, the caretaker in charge of the Werribee Mechanics Hall, met with a serious accident while opening the drum containing carbide prior to charging the acetylene gas generator. He struck a match and an explosion took place. He was burnt on the face and the neck. So very sad. And then at Merino, here, which is in the Western District near Coleraine, June 1910, an explosion occurred in the Merino Mechanics Institute on Monday night while the secretary, Mr. Clark, was attending to the acetylene generator. The roof of the house was blown off. Mr. Clark was thrown some distance away and received injuries to his leg, shoulder and face, and he is confined to bed, but he's doing well. Fires, of course, endless amount of fires. We won't go to Garfield first. We'll start with the Lineville. The Lineville Mechanics Institute. So it was opened in April 1880, and then in November 1880, it burnt to the ground. It was being burned down by an unprincipled scoundrel, is what the Ballarat Star said. The building is clean, burnt to the ground, and sundry books, lamps, papers are all destroyed. So I would say that the Mechanics Institute lasted only 7 months, and I feel is there a candidate for a shorter lived building? And I think we probably will not find one. It was actually rebuilt in 1886-87. And of course, endless fires. So this is a Garfield Mechanics Institute, built 1904, burnt down April 1937. And they replaced it with this magnificent building, to which clearly no expense has been spared when it comes to design elements and features. So they replaced it with this, a mere Oh, it was only 5 months later. 5 months later, after it burnt down, they actually built this one, which is pretty good going. But then that burnt down in February 1984. So this is Churidan. So Churidan burnt down June 1937, and the Weekly Times said at the time, 3,000 books, forming one of the most comprehensive country libraries in Victoria, were burnt in a fire which destroyed the 75-year-old Mechanics Institute building. It was blazing fiercely at 4:30 a.m, and the townspeople looked on helplessly without any water supply with which to combat it. So it was a very sad thing, but the replacement building was opened less than a year later in March 1938. Bunyip Hall, this lovely little building, was opened in June 1906, destroyed by fire March 1940. And interesting, the local paper had a list of how it was insured. So the main hall was insured for £1,100, the piano for £40, the books for £45, the billiard table £50, on a board £20, and the picture plant for the movies was actually insured for £400. And that was replaced in October 1942. This is Lang Lang. So this is the original, you can see the top of the original Mechanics Institute behind, and then they built this front on for a memorial hall in 1925. That was destroyed by fire in November 1966, and it took 6 years then for the council to replace it. The new building wasn't open until 1972. So you can see that I'll go there. I'll go somewhere else. Tornadoes. You may be surprised to hear that tornadoes have impacted at least 3 buildings. So Sale in 1895, Nil in 1897, but this Bungaree here in June 1927. So this is it. All that remained. This is a piano. All that remained was the piano, and it made the front page of the Sun News Pictorial. One of the articles said, a remarkable instance of the force of the cyclone was provided by the shifting of the home of Mr. and Mrs. Bennett on Millbrook Road. The building their house was lifted from its foundations, and the house changed from its eastern aspect to face a southerly direction. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett were in the house at the time, and its rockings gave them a terrifying time. The duration of the wind was just under 2 minutes, but it blew with terrible intensity and caused wreckage in its path. So, yeah. And, okay, so I'm not sure about anything else. However, of course, one of the things about disasters is not the fact is that in the past, once there was a disaster, the public all rallied around the building and they cleared it up, they agitated to get a new building or to fix or repair it. So it was more the fact that it was awful for the community their building was lost, but then it became a rallying point to actually to get the to sort of get the building reinstated. So, you know, they did really bring out the best in people in some ways, even though it was a tragic thing. We're nearly there, don't worry, we're nearly finished. So, I came across this article in The Age, January 23, 1999. It was an article about the Burke & Wills Institute at Fryestown. So this is Mrs. Jessie Cole. And I thought what this represents, 2 things. Who we met before, who was secretary of the Quantum Mechanics Institute, and it's typical that they're sort of typical of the volunteers who've agitated for, built and maintained our mechanics institutes over the years, and many people, of course, still do. And most mechanics institutes could never have functioned without the Mrs. Coles and the Mrs. Browns of the world. So I just thought it was such a classic photo with the cups of tea, the trays of sandwiches, Christmas cake, more food over there. So we're very grateful to the Mrs. Coles of the world. And the second thing I thought about this is, how many cups of tea have been partaken of in mechanics institutes over the years? And I thought, surely the number would run into millions. So I did a scientific calculation. And this is my calculation. So 1,000 mechanics institutes of, on average, 80 years in existence, 3 events per week by 52 weeks of the year, with an average of 40 cups of tea made, and this is the figure, which I think is that right? I've read that out. It seems to be right. 499 million cups of tea. No, this is accurate, David. This is an accurate calculation. So, and I was astounded by that. And then I thought, surely, if they were laid, and here I have an example of a cup. So these are from the Cure Historical Society. I thought if each cup of tea was laid edge to edge, I didn't have sources, different sources. If they were laid on top of each other, would it reach the moon and back? So I did more calculations, and the answer is no. So, and you can't believe how disappointed I was. So 77 centimetres, so that's 34,944 kilometres if they were laid edge to edge. Distance to the moon, 384,000.
But
So-
maybe by the 800th anniversary.
What's that? Sorry?
Maybe by the 800th anniversary.
Oh, okay, yeah, indeed. By the 800th anniversary, we'll get to the moon. Anyway, you can't believe how disappointed I was to find out we're nowhere near the moon. However, you know, what these cups of tea actually represent is the way the community has come together in the past 180 years of Mechanics Institutes and the importance of the Mechanics Institutes in our history. Like as a place to learn, a place to socialise, a place to read, a place to entertain, and it's a place where community had some ownership of their building. And that's what's important about the whole thing. It was and still is our hall. People would think that is our hall, that is our Mechanics Institute, and I don't believe that any new community hub built by the council could ever engender the same feelings of belonging or ownership. So that's really the end of my talk, even though we haven't reached the moon. We've done lots of other good things. But I do have, if I've got time, a very quick slideshow, an A to Z of some interesting buildings. So as you can see here, Alberton. So this is obviously the classic Mechanics Institute design, a bit like Coral Inn, your basic hall. I mean, you could put a spire, you could put like a cross on a bigger church, it could be a school, it could be anything. So this was Alberton. But quick through here, Barfold the same, but a bit more decoration. Clyde North, the same. Dunkeld, that's a nice one. I like that one. Eddington, which is in, look, I can't remember where it is. A bit fancier with buttresses. As they're finance if they need it. Wide buttresses here, fancy arch windows. Yeah. Framlington, your basic hall. Geelong, clearly a nice bluestone building with a rendered front. That's a nice one. Hill End, the same architectural style as the second Garfield Hall, obviously made of cement sheet, but I guess, you know, it doesn't really matter because they were community built and the community, it's what happened inside the buildings rather than what the buildings look like. Inverleigh, a lovely bluestone one. Jung, thank you, Jung. Caranbara, nice big one. Lilydale, that's still in existence. Murchison. Near, so here's near your basic weatherboard building with this fancy sort of pediment. I don't know what convinced them to do that, anyway. So I tried to make it pretty. Ocean Grove, your basic building. Portland, another bluestone. Queenscliff, a brick building. Ringwood. Sorrento, that's limestone, beautiful limestone building, that's still there. Then now the home of the Nepean Historical Society. Traralgon, Ullina. Ullina is near the Clunes. Never heard of it. Yeah. Ventnor on Phillip Island, and the last one. My favourite one. I'm leaving this to last. My favourite one. Where are we? So, like just your basic weatherboard, and yet it's got this fancy front. I just love this building. So it's just sort of like it's like a wedding cake, everything I want. That's sort of what I would have done if I was on a Mechanics Institute. I would have had all this stuff on it. You know, I just think it's fabulous. Anyway, this was 1911, and yet the photo in the Western collection, he took photos in the 1960s, is this. And I think it took about downgraded a century. So, you know, I couldn't believe you could go from this to that. However, that's what they did. I think this is demolished now as well. So I haven't got X, Y, Z. But anyway, that's the finish of my talk. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Heather, for such an engaging and interesting talk. We really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Something.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
We've got time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, if anybody's got any questions. And if not, there's tea and biscuits at the back. Our shop is open downstairs. If anybody would like to subscribe to our email, the iPad is at the back there, and there's some books on display from our collection. Any questions?
Yeah. Who owns the buildings now if they're still in existence?
Well, I believe some are on council land, some are on wealth land, some are still owned by trustees. I think it just depends on where they are. There's
So
still-
if they wanted to do something to, you know, to do it up or whatever,
So
it would be a responsibility of various people who
various
own.
people, yeah. So the Cardinia Hall, for instance, we're still owned by trustees, and they're just now handed it over to the Cardinia Council. So, you know, what finding, you know, it's all right to have trustees to mind a building. What they're finding is that they're all getting old and no one's interested anymore. So there's no one really to run the building. So yeah, so it's a combination of various people. Yeah.
I've got a question. Thank you, Heather, for an incredible talk. So
Okay.
engaging. I was wondering if you'd done any